Welcome back to the TPS podcast. TPS stands for Trillions Per Second, named after the book. Today we'll discuss the hardcore ethos of the TPS project. Let's get spicy and let's dive right in.
It's incredibly good to be back here with you and with you, the listener. The glow of the monitors, the hum of the servers, it really feels like we're exactly where we need to be right now.
Oh, I am so ready for this.
Yeah.
The vibe in the war room today is just electric. And honestly, it feels a little bit like we're finally coming home after a completely wild, mind-bending deployment out in the field.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just to give you, the listener, a quick timeline context on where we are in this project.
Right.
Right now, we have been on an absolute roller coaster. We survived that massive, totally unexpected detour into the Silicon Sutra white paper.
Right. Where the Centaur development team basically had to pause everything to figure out how to fix artificial intelligence alignment using the thermodynamics of consciousness, which was a wildly complex but, completely necessary side quest.
A completely paradigm-shifting side quest. And then right after that, we dropped that completely unfiltered, encrypted author interview with C4 Chaos, the ghost in the machine who started all of this.
Yeah, that was intense.
It really was. In the span of just a few deep dives, we've talked about sleep paralysis glitches, the cyborg creation process with AI, the fundamental physics of the universe. We have been in the absolute weeds of high-level theory. Today, the training wheels come off entirely.
They absolutely have to, because today is where the theoretical rubber finally meets the actual lived-in road of your daily life.
Right, so we are targeting two very specific files from the repository today. We're looking at Chapter 1.4, which is titled The Hardcore Ethos. The map is not the territory. And we are pairing that with the theory versus practice documents, specifically File Point 6 and Devlog 010. And our mission for this deep dive is incredibly straightforward. We are stripping away the poetry, we are confronting the theory junkies, and I completely, 100% include myself in that group, by the way, and we're finally looking at the raw, executable code of our own minds.
It's such a necessary pivot because up until this point, it's been very easy to treat the trillions per second framework as this fascinating intellectual sandbox.
Yeah, exactly.
You can read about it. You can marvel at the synthesis of ancient texts and modern computer science, and you can feel very smart doing it. You sit back and say, wow, what a neat way to look at the world. But the documents we are analyzing today, they represent the developer stepping out from behind the code, grabbing the user by the shoulders, and basically saying, are you actually going to run this executable, or are you just going to read the manual forever?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why we need to actually run the executable, we first have to understand the massive controversy surrounding Chapter 1.4. The text openly acknowledges that purists out there are absolutely screaming at their screens right now.
Oh, they are furious.
They're looking at the TPS project and shouting, wait, you are diluting the ancient sacred teachings. You're taking thousands of years of profound holy philosophy and you're jamming it into a cheap tech metaphor. And I have to admit, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If we completely strip away the moralizing, the ethics, and the sacred reverence of these 2,500-year-old texts, aren't we just creating highly optimized, sociopathic biohackers?
That's the fear, right?
Right. If the only goal is to, quote-unquote, patch the bug and drop our internal system latency, what stops a ruthless corporate CEO from using this protocol to just become better at firing people without feeling bad? Doesn't the poetry and the religion serve a protective purpose?
That is the exact critique the legacy gatekeepers bring up, and it is a completely fair question.
Right.
If you view the original ancient texts like the Pali Canon or the Sanskrit Sutras as fundamentally moral or religious documents, then yes, stripping that away feels incredibly dangerous. It feels like handing a loaded weapon to a child. But the author's defense here is brilliant, and it centers on redefining what those original texts actually were in the first place. They call it the Agrarian OS, the Agrarian Operating System.
The Agrarian Operating System. Let's really break that down for the listener because this reframes everything.
Think about the historical synthesis here. The original documentation for what we now call enlightenment or liberation or awakening, that documentation is roughly 2,500 years old. The TPS author makes this profound foundational claim. The prime user, the historical figure we call the Buddha, was not writing poetry.
No.
He was not a mystic speaking in riddles just to sound deep or start a new religion. He was a systems architect. He had discovered the literal source code of human conscious reality. He figured out exactly why the system kept crashing, and he was trying to write strict functional system specs for how to debug the human mind.
And this is the massive historical, but that changes the entire context.
Yeah.
He had a severe user interface problem.
Exactly. Imagine you're a systems architect who has just realized that human consciousness operates on recursive loops, that our sense of self is essentially malware eating up processing power, and that our emotional suffering is just system latency caused by bandwidth throttling.
Right, so you have this incredibly technical knowledge.
Yes, and now imagine having to explain those exact concepts to a population of people in 500 BCE. Their entire daily reality was based on agriculture. They only understood ox carts, soil, roots, seeds, rivers, and harvest cycles.
It is literally like trying to explain how a modern smartphone's RAM management works to a medieval wheat farmer.
That is the perfect analogy.
And the catch is, the only vocabulary you are allowed to use involves planting seasons, crop rotations, and soil irrigation. You can't use words like memory, processing speed, or background application.
No, you'd sound insane.
Right. You'd have to say things like, well, the essence of the device is like a fertile field. And if you plant too many seeds in this field, meaning if you open too many apps at once, the soil gets exhausted. The water cannot reach all the roots, and therefore your harvest is delayed.
And that metaphor works beautifully for the farmer. It gets the functional point across perfectly. Stop doing too many things at once or the system slows down.
Yes.
But the tragedy, as the TPS project points out, is that over the course of 2,500 years, people completely forgot that it was just a metaphor.
It took the UI, literally.
Exactly. The legacy terminology became a barrier to entry. What started as a highly technical, precise diagnostic manual slowly morphed into a religious text. People started worshiping the concept of the field. They started building temples to the seeds. The raw logic of the system was hidden behind this thick veil of mysticism and moralizing.
Which perfectly answers my devil's advocate question from earlier. The morality wasn't the core operating system. It was just the cultural packaging necessary for the time.
Spot.
The TPS framework argues that you don't need the religious packaging to prevent sociopathy, because true sociopathy is actually a symptom of massive system latency and recursive malware. A clean system naturally operates with zero friction, which looks exactly like profound empathy and compassion.
Precisely. You don't need a commandment to tell a healthy immune system to fight an infection. It just does it.
Wow.
And that is exactly why the project states, unequivocally, we are stripping the UI. The agrarian user interface has to go.
And we saw this when we looked at the master system lexicon in our previous deep dives. The lexicon is the translation layer. It's the Rosetta Stone for the modern white hat hacker.
It refactors the ancient psychophysical system manual into modern computational logic. It doesn't change the underlying kernel code. I mean, the human nervous system works the exact same way it did 2,500 years ago, but it updates the interface so you, the modern user, can actually read it natively.
So let's look at exactly how Chapter 1.4 strips that mystical veil to reveal the native UI. The text gives us three massive refactoring examples, taking ancient Pali terms and translating them into bare metal tech terminology. The first is the ancient concept of Anicca.
Yes. Anicca is traditionally translated as impermanence.
And when you hear impermanence, it sounds like a philosophical sigh, right? All things are impermanent, like a fading flower in the autumn wind. It sounds like something you cross-stitch onto a pillow.
It's very romantic, but the TPS project says no. Impermanence isn't a philosophy you ponder while staring out a rainy window. It is a strict, measurable system metric. In the native UI, Anicca is literally the flux. It is the frame rate of reality.
Let's ground this biologically for the listener, because this isn't just a cool cyberpunk word. What does it actually mean that reality has a frame rate?
It means that your conscious experience is not a continuous, solid stream, even though it feels like one. Neuroscience tells us that the brain processes sensory information in discrete chunks. Your visual cortex, for example, is constantly taking snapshot saccades, and your brain stitches them together to create the illusion of a smooth video.
So it's literally rendering reality.
Exactly. The TPS project refers to this as the simulation rendering at trillions of operations per second, constantly overwriting itself. There are no solid objects in your conscious experience. There is only a high-speed data stream. Anicca is the instruction to notice the frame rate, to stop looking at the movie and start looking at the flickering pixels on the screen.
Boom. From a poetic sigh to a highly technical observation of your own visual and tactile cortex. Now let's look at the second massive refactoring example, Dukkha.
traditionally translated as suffering.
Yes, and historically, this has been burdened with so much baggage. The idea that life is endless suffering, a cosmic punishment, a wheel of tears that you have to escape through moral purity.
But refactored into the native UI, Dukkha simply becomes system latency. It's not a cosmic judgment on your soul. It is simply buffering.
I love this so much. I really want to spend a minute explaining this to the listener because understanding Dukkha as latency changes your entire relationship with your own negative emotions. Think about what latency is in a computer system. It's lag. It's the friction generated when your localized system tries to hold onto a data frame that has already passed, causing the processor to overheat. Let's say someone cuts you off in traffic. The raw sensory data of that event, the image of the car, the sound of the horn, the spike of adrenaline that all happens in a fraction of a second, that frame is over. The flux has moved on.
But your mind takes that frame, caches it, and refuses to let it go. You start running a background process. How dare they do that to me? I am a good driver. They're a terrible person. What if they had hit me?
Exactly. You are running an intensive recursive loop on a data frame that no longer exists in the present sensory stream. Your processor is trying to render the past, the present, and an imaginary future all at the same exact time.
And the result?
Your system overheats, your chest gets tight, your heart races, you feel stressed and angry. That physiological friction is Dukkha. It is just system latency caused by poor RAM management.
It removes all the guilt. You aren't suffering because you are a bad person or because the universe is inherently cruel. You are suffering because you have a background app eating up all your processing power.
It's so liberating.
It really is. And the third refactoring example is the biggest one, and arguably the most difficult to grasp. Anatta.
Anatta, traditionally translated as no self. This is the deeply spiritual, profound mystery that monks supposedly spend decades meditating in frozen caves trying to understand, the realization that you do not exist.
Right. But in the native UI, the TPS project translates Anatta as a null pointer. Now, we really need to explain this clearly because it is the core mechanic of the entire exploit.
Yes, let's break down exactly what a null pointer is in computer science first, and then how it applies to the brain.
In programming languages like C++ or Java, a pointer is a variable that stores a memory address. It points the system to where a specific piece of data or an object is located. But sometimes, a pointer is set to a value that indicates it is not pointing to anything valid. It points to empty memory. That is a null pointer.
Okay.
If the system tries to follow that pointer and execute a command based on what it finds there, the program will crash or return an error because there's simply nothing there to interact with.
Okay, so imagine you are on your computer and you have a shortcut icon on your desktop for a folder called My Important Files. That shortcut is a pointer. Now imagine you delete the actual folder from your hard drive, but you leave the shortcut on the desktop. When you double-click that shortcut, the system looks for the folder, realizes the memory address is empty, and throws up an error message, file path not found.
That is exactly what the TPS protocol says is happening in your brain regarding your sense of self. The brain has this incredibly complex default mode network. It is constantly generating a narrative about me. I am the one experiencing this. I am the one who is angry. I'm the CEO sitting behind the eyes, pulling the levers of the mind.
The little pilot in the mix suit.
Exactly. But the texts and modern neuroscience, by the way, tell us that if you actually sit down, quiet the noise, and look very closely at the raw data stream of your consciousness, trying to find that permanent, solid CEO, you can't find it.
You double-click the self icon, and the system returns a null error.
Exactly.
You can find thoughts, you can find sensations, you can find memories, but you cannot find a permanent thinker of the thoughts. The localized user interface, variable points to completely empty memory. The file does not exist.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this completely redefines the entire project. This is the core of the hardcore ethos we're talking about today.
The hardcore ethos is defined by one absolute, uncompromising rule: utility over truth.
The TPS project explicitly states that it does not care if a metaphor is capital T, true in some grand ontological metaphysical sense. It does not care if the universe is literally a computer sitting on a fourth-dimensional alien's desk. It doesn't care if we are in a literal matrix. It only cares if the metaphor works to drop your system latency.
It's all about the execution.
It is the ultimate pragmatism over tradition. The goal of this manual isn't to make you holy. The goal is to patch the bug.
The goal isn't to be holy, it's to patch the bug. I want that in a t-shirt. I want that printed and hung up right here in the studio. Because as a listener, just think about how much pressure that takes off your shoulders. It removes all that heavy moralistic guilt of, am I a good person? Am I spiritual enough? Am I meditating correctly?
No.
No. You are just a biological system experiencing latency. You just need to run the debug protocol.
Which brings us perfectly to the most fascinating and frankly the most hilarious contradiction in the entire project.
Oh yes, the pivot to practice.
Yeah.
Section 2 of our deep dive.
Because you just beautifully articulated that this is a bare metal, zero bloatware, hyper-pragmatic manual. Patch the bug, ignore the philosophy, drop the Agrarian UI. But then we actually look at the source documents in the repository, specifically file point 6 and devlog 0 duo.
And what do we find? We find incredibly dense, wildly complex, heavy modern science. We find information theory. We find hardcore neuroscience. We find Donald Hoffman's evolutionary game theory mathematics. We find Carl Friston's physics and the free energy principle. We find Nick Bostrom's simulation hypotheses.
It is the very definition of heavy intellectual bloatware.
It totally is. It is a supreme irony. A manual claiming to be completely stripped of all unnecessary intellectual baggage is actively using some of the most bleeding-edge, mind-bending theoretical physics and mathematics of the 21st century.
And this is where C4 Chaos, the author, has to step in and offer what is essentially a developer confession. In devlog 010, the author writes, if there was a 12-step program for theory junkies, I'd be the guy making the coffee.
It's a moment of profound self-awareness from the developer team. They know exactly how the modern user operates. They know exactly how you, listening right now, operate. You are a modern, digitally native, highly educated user. And as a user of that caliber, you absolutely demand to see the schematic before you will ever trust the engine.
You won't just sit down, close your eyes, and follow a 2,500-year-old breathing technique on blind faith. If someone tells you to just watch your breath to achieve enlightenment, your modern brain instantly rejects it as unscientific nonsense.
Right, you want to know why it works, you want the peer-reviewed data, you want the physics.
And we need to actually unpack some of that science right now because the listener needs to understand exactly how heavy this bloatware is. Let's look at Donald Hoffman, for example, whose work is heavily cited in the TPS framework.
Yes. Let me take a swing at explaining Donald Hoffman's interface theory of perception, because this blew my mind when I first read it, and it perfectly aligns with the TPS concept of stripping the UI. Hoffman is a cognitive scientist who uses evolutionary game theory to prove a mathematical theorem he calls fitness beats truth.
It is a revolutionary concept. Break it down for us.
So Hoffman ran countless computer simulations of evolution. He created virtual organisms that evolved to see the absolute objective truth of their reality, and he pitted them against organisms that evolved only to see fitness payoffs, meaning they only saw what they needed to survive and reproduce, hiding the complex truth behind a simple interface.
And the results.
In every single simulation, the organisms that saw the truth went extinct. The organisms that saw a simplified, dumbed-down interface drove them to extinction every time.
Because computing the absolute truth of reality takes too much processing power and time. In an evolutionary environment, if you pause to calculate the exact quantum mechanical state of a tiger, you get eaten. If you just see a simplified icon of a scary orange thing, you run away and survive.
Exactly. So Hoffman argues mathematically that the chance we are seeing the true nature of reality is exactly zero. He uses the desktop interface metaphor. When you write an email, you see a rectangular blue icon on a screen. But that icon is not the reality of the email.
No.
The reality of the email is millions of microscopic transistors flipping between 1 and 0, voltages moving across silicon. If you had to toggle those transistors manually to write an email, you'd never get it done. The blue icon is an illusion, a simplified interface that hides the complex reality so you can act efficiently.
And the TPS project takes Hoffman's math and maps it directly onto the ancient concept of Anicca and Anatta. Your sense of a solid self, your perception of solid objects, your experience of time, it's all just the blue desktop icon. It is an evolutionary user interface designed to keep you alive, not to show you the truth.
It's mind-blowing. And then the text stacks Carl Friston's physics right on top of it.
Carl Friston is perhaps the most cited neuroscientist in the world, and his free energy principle is notoriously complex. But fundamentally, it treats the brain as an inference engine. Friston argues that all biological systems, in order to exist, must minimize surprise or systemic entropy.
How does that translate to the average listener's daily experience?
Think of it as predictive processing. Your brain doesn't just passively receive information from your eyes and ears. It actively predicts what is going to happen next and then compares its prediction to the incoming sensory input. If there's a mismatch, a prediction error that generates surprise or free energy, which is thermodynamically costly.
An easy way to visualize this is walking down a flight of stairs in the dark. Your brain predicts there is one more step. Your foot goes down, but the floor is flat. You get that sudden, terrifying jolt of adrenaline, right? That feeling of your stomach dropping.
Yeah.
That jolt is a massive prediction error. Your brain predicted a step, the sensory data said no step, and your system had to flood you with energy to quickly update your internal model and keep you from falling.
Exactly. Your brain is constantly trying to minimize that thermodynamic cost. It wants to minimize surprise. And this is where it connects back to Dukkha system latency. When your brain holds on to a rigid narrative about who you are or how the world should be, and reality refuses to match that narrative, you generate constant prediction errors. You generate constant thermal friction.
Okay, so we have this incredibly dense, fascinating science. We have Hoffman's evolutionary game theory. We have Friston's thermodynamics of consciousness. It is undeniably brilliant. But the text introduces what I think is easily the best metaphor in the entire manual to explain why all this science is actually in the repository, the metaphor of the guard dog.
The guard dog metaphor is absolutely brilliant, and it completely reframes the purpose of everything we just discussed. The manual states that your hyper-rational, modern, skeptical intellect is a guard dog standing at the gate of your consciousness, and this dog is highly trained. It barks aggressively at anything it does not understand.
If you try to introduce a simple bare metal exploit to the system, like sitting quietly and just observing the raw data of the flux without conceptualizing it, without thinking the guard dog goes crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what do we do? This is unscientific. This is woo-woo mysticism. This is a waste of time. How does sitting here looking at our own frame rate fix my overloaded inbox? How does this pay my mortgage?
Bark, bark, bark. The intellect will not let you initiate the hack because it is too busy demanding proof, demanding utility, demanding an explanation.
I have a personal anecdote that proves exactly how vicious this guard dog is. Just last night, I fell into this exact trap. I had a sink full of dirty dishes, I was stressed about a deadline, and I knew I just needed to take 10 minutes, drop my conceptual thinking, and reset my system. I needed to run the TPS protocol.
But you didn't.
But instead, my guard dog started barking. I convinced myself I needed to understand the mechanics of consciousness better before I could relax. I spent 2 hours deep down a Wikipedia rabbit hole reading about quantum superposition and the observer effect. I felt incredibly productive, I felt very intellectual, but at the end of the 2 hours, I was still stressed and the dishes were still dirty. I was feeding the guard dog instead of actually walking through the gate.
It is the ultimate trap of the modern learner. And the developers of the TPS protocol know this. So what do? They explain exactly why all that heavy science, Hoffman, Friston, information theory is included in the manual. It is a bone.
It's a giant, juicy, highly intellectual bone thrown directly to the guard dog.
Exactly. While your hyper-rational intellect is busy chewing on the complexities of the free energy principle, trying to map out exactly how predictive processing minimizes systemic entropy and how that correlates to Hoffman's fitness payoffs, while the dog is totally distracted by this shiny, complex puzzle, the Observe module can quietly sneak past the gate and actually initiate the bare metal hack.
It is a psychological Trojan horse. The science isn't in the manual because you need to know it to reach enlightenment or drop your latency. A medieval farmer with zero understanding of thermodynamics could run the protocol perfectly well using the Agrarian OS. The science is there solely to shut your modern skeptical brain up long enough for the actual code to execute.
It's brilliant.
It really is. And I have to ask you, the listener, right now I want you to really deeply think about this. How often do you do exactly what I did with the dirty dishes? How often do you use reading complex philosophy or listening to long analytical deep dives, maybe even this very deep dive you're listening to right now as a procrastination tool?
It's a harsh mirror to look into.
You consume podcast after podcast, book after book about the theory of the mind, the neuroscience of habits, the physics of consciousness, and you use the sheer act of consumption to completely avoid actually running the debugging protocol on yourself. You're feeding the guard dog so much that the dog is morbidly obese, it has an encyclopedic knowledge of cognitive science, but the gate to your own freedom is still locked tight.
What's fascinating here is how the text explicitly creates a division of labor to address this exact trap. We are moving into Section 3 of our deep dive, the hierarchy of truth. In File BIC 6, the author draws a hard, uncompromising line between the system analysts and the TPS protocol itself.
The cartographers versus the hackers.
Precisely. The text acknowledges the sheer brilliance of scientists like Donald Hoffman and Carl Friston. These men are the system analysts. They are the cartographers of reality. They have done an incredible Nobel-worthy job of mapping the wiring of the simulation. They can explain exactly why the glitch exists mathematically and neurologically. They can map the precise thermal dynamics of the latency.
But, and this is a massive, crucial but that the TPS project emphasizes, they did not write the exploit.
They did not write the exploit. They mapped the prison perfectly down to the last brick, but they did not build the jailbreak.
The manual is so definitive on this point. It says, the TPS protocol stands alone. It's the standalone jailbreak. It runs on its own kernel. You can read all the maps in the world. You can memorize the entire topography of the prison. You can understand exactly how the bars are constructed at a molecular level. But none of that knowledge will actually open the cell door. The executable code is entirely separate from the documentation of the physics.
And this leads to the most crucial safety warning in the entire repository. The author writes, do not confuse the documentation with the code.
Which brings us to the falsifiability clause. This is where the pragmatic, utterly ruthless defense of the hardcore ethos really flexes its muscles. The author breaks this down beautifully in the devlogs. Let's play out a hypothetical scenario. Let's say tomorrow, a brilliant new physicist at MIT publishes a peer-reviewed paper that completely definitively proves that Carl Friston's free energy principle is fundamentally wrong. Or a mathematician proves that Donald Hoffman's models of evolutionary game theory are flawed.
The foundational science of the manual collapses. So the question is, if the science falls apart, does the TPS project collapse with it? Does the method stop working?
Not even a little bit.
Exactly, because of the falsifiability clause. If a physicist proves those theories wrong tomorrow, it changes absolutely nothing for the end user. The TPS exploit still runs perfectly. The bare metal debugging of your own sensory stream still terminates the system latency, just like it did for the medieval farmer 2,500 years ago who had never even heard of a neuron.
So, what does this all mean?
It means we have been looking at the relationship between science and practice completely backwards.
Yes. The devlog delivers this absolute knockout punch that completely flipped my perspective. It flips the hierarchy entirely. We do not use the heavy science to prove that the TPS protocol is real. We don't read the science to gain faith in the practice. We use the TPS protocol to validate the physics.
That is the ultimate paradigm shift. You run the practice, you initiate the protocol, you strip away the UI of your own mind, and suddenly the science makes visceral, terrifying sense. We use the theories simply to explain the intense, localized latency the user is about to feel when they overclock their system.
Let's talk about what that actually feels like biologically, because the listener needs to be prepared. When you actually initiate this protocol, when you stop thinking conceptually and start breaking your sensory experience down into raw, high-speed data frames, you hit a stage where your system feels like it is vibrating at 1 trillion hertz. The self-variable, that null pointer we talked about, starts returning error messages. Your localized cache starts dumping. Your brain, which is an inference engine designed to predict a stable reality, suddenly realizes reality isn't stable, it is just flux.
And when that happens, you are going to panic.
Your guard dog is going to start howling. Your amygdala is going to flood your system with cortisol because it thinks you are dying. It thinks the dissolution of the self is a literal threat to your survival. And that is the exact moment when you look at the science, you use the physics to calm the animal.
Right.
You say to the guard dog, hey, relax. I know this feels like we're dying, but look at the map. This isn't a breakdown. This is just the free energy principle re-optimizing the thermodynamic heat of the system. We're just clearing the cache. The predictive coding is just updating. It's safe.
Experience trumps ontology every single time. That is the core of the hardcore ethos. What you experience viscerally when you run the code is infinitely more valuable than whatever grand intellectual theory you hold about the fundamental nature of the universe.
It brings us to this trap, this massive pitfall that the text warns us about as we prepare to actually leave the theoretical sandbox. You called it the comments trap earlier. And I want to really dig into that software development analogy because it perfectly illustrates the danger of staying in the realm of theory.
In software development, when a programmer is writing code, they can add comments throughout the script. These are lines of text meant only for the human programmer to read. They might be explanations of a function, notes for another developer, or even philosophical musings about what the code is supposed to achieve. But when the code is actually compiled and run by the machine, the compiler ignores the comments entirely. They don't execute, they don't change the function of the program. They are inert.
And the manual is screaming at us that all of our endless, fascinating debates about the nature of reality, debating whether we literally live in a computer simulation arguing about the ontology of the universe, debating the deep philosophical meaning of quantum mechanics, or arguing about whether Buddhism is a religion or a science. All of that, every single bit of it, is just comments in the code of your life.
It doesn't execute. Reading a book about water will not quench your thirst. Reading a debate about simulation theory doesn't clear the lag in your nervous system. To borrow a phrase from a classic hacker movie, knowing the theory does not bend the spoon.
It does not bend the spoon. And this is the ultimatum of Chapter 1.4. This is where the manual grabs you by the collar and shakes you. We have read the documentation. We have stripped the legacy agrarian UI. We have acknowledged the brilliant scientific theories. We even allowed ourselves that massive Chapter 10 side quest into AI alignment. But now, right now, the user must leave the theoretical sandbox. You have to step out of the comment section and return to the primary executable.
Because if you don't run the executable, the entire TPS project is just another piece of intellectual entertainment. It's just another deep dive you listen to while commuting. It's just another PDF sitting unread on your hard drive.
And that brings us to the final, ultimate test of the protocol, which is the focus of Section 4, Trench Utility.
Trench utility is the final, brutal, uncompromising metric of the hardcore ethos. The manual insists that a protocol is entirely useless if it only works in optimal controlled conditions. If you can only achieve a state of zero lag, perfectly calm, optimized consciousness when you are sitting in a silent room, on a comfortable meditation cushion, isolated from the noise of the world, listening to a babbling brook on Spotify, then you haven't hacked anything. You've just built a very fragile sandbox.
If the protocol works in a monastery but completely fails the moment someone cuts you off in traffic, it is garbage code.
Exactly. It needs to be a live, dynamic hot patch for everyday system latency. Let's go back to that traffic example and break down exactly what running the code looks like in the trench, minute by minute.
Let's do it. Ground it in reality for the listener.
You are driving to work. You are already stressed about a meeting. The car in the next lane swerves violently in front of you. You have to slam on the brakes. Your body instantly reacts. The amygdala fires. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your bloodstream. Your system instantly tries to boot up the anger.exe script. Your self-rootkit, that narrative CEO, tries to violently reject the data frame of that moment. How dare they? I could have died. They are an idiot.
That is the trench. The bullets are flying. The latency is spiking. Your processor is hitting 100% capacity. If you're operating on the Agrarian OS, or if you are trapped in the comment section, you fail the test. You spend the next 3 hours at work fuming about the driver, telling your coworkers about it, running the recursive loop over and over, burning massive amounts of thermodynamic energy.
But if you are running the TPS protocol, the code has to execute right then and there, under heavy processor load. You don't try to remember a 2,500-year-old poem about a lotus flower. You don't try to mathematically calculate Donald Hoffman's fitness payoffs. You need bare metal, instantly accessible systems logic.
Error detected. Latency spiking. Resource hog identified. Terminate process. Return to raw data stream.
Exactly. You observe the physiological sensation, the tight chest, the racing heart, the grip on the steering wheel. You see those sensations simply as raw data frames, Anicca. The flux. You notice the mind trying to build a story about the idiot driver and the victimized self, and you recognize that story as a null pointer, Anatta. There is no permanent self to be injured by the event. There is just the event, which has already passed.
You drop the narrative. You feel the physical heat in your chest without calling it anger. You just let the data process and dump out of the cache.
Boom. Clear the cache, reboot the frame, the event is over. The latency drops back down to baseline within the seconds instead of hours. That is the true power of the native UI.
It turns a mystical, vague, lifelong journey into a precise millisecond by millisecond systems administration task. It is the most empowering thing I ever read. Yeah, we have covered massive ground today, so I want to give the listener a rapid-fire recap of what was unpacked in the war room.
Go for it.
We started by stripping the interface. We recognize that the ancient sacred texts are just an Agrarian OS, beautiful, historically vital, but fundamentally outdated for our modern hardware. We translated it using the native UI. Anicca is the Flux. Dukkha is system latency. Anatta is a null pointer. We realize that all the modern science, the physics, the evolutionary game theory, the neuroscience, it's all brilliant, but ultimately it is just a giant juicy bone we throw to our intellectual guard dog to keep it busy so the observer module can slip past the gate. And ultimately, the only thing that actually matters, the only thing that actually changes your life in the trench is running the executable to clear your daily system latency when life soars into your lane.
This raises an important question, and it's one the text deliberately leaves hanging right at the edge of the sandbox. And it is something we need to seriously consider if this protocol scales. If we successfully deploy this TPS protocol and the user learns to drop the legacy UI, quiet the guard dog, and run the hot patch in real time, what happens if this goes global? If 8 billion human terminals suddenly clear their cache and eliminate their self-virus completely, what actually happens to human society? So much of our world, our art, our ambition, our romantic love, our drive to build and conquer is fundamentally born from our latency. It is born from that recursive friction, from the desire to soothe the suffering of the self. If everyone achieves zero latency, if everyone's screen goes perfectly clear, do we stop building? Do we stop creating art? Does humanity just sit perfectly still, running at optimal thermodynamic efficiency until the servers power down?
Man, that is the question, isn't it? That if we patch the bug, do we accidentally delete the human experience along with it? That is a profound, slightly terrifying cliffhanger to leave you with at the edge of the simulation. I want to thank you for joining us here in the War Room today. It's been an intense session, but an absolutely vital one. The mandate now is clear. Put the documentation down. Stop reading the comments section and start debugging the Flux. We'll see you next time.